Welcome, Salman. So great to see you. And it's so exciting to talk to you today and to talk about the project you're in at the Frick, Living Histories, Queer Views and Old Masters. You're one of the artists represented in this project. You have your wonderful painting, Museum Boys, in our Vermeer gallery on the second floor here at Frick Madison. So I thought, let's just jump straight into it. What is your relationship with Old Masters? I mean, I know you're someone who looks at them a lot and thinks about them a lot in your career. Can you tell us a little bit more about this relationship, and in particular, the relationship right now of your work with Vermeer?
I've spent a long time looking at old master paintings. I moved to New York from Ohio in 2006, and part of the reason that I came here was a fantasy not only of the artist's life, but also to just be close to massive collections of European pictures that I just wanted to look at and study the surfaces of. I wasn't, like my contemporaries, interested in contemporary art at the time. I, kind of wanted to just be an academic artist. And for me, that meant replicating the best moments of a lot of dead white men who were, in collections that were inspiring to me, especially because there was a kind of dignity in the portraiture, dignity I feel like that was created in Western painting, in which the power and the self-presentation of the protagonist is paramount and the world is a kind of gridded perspective obeying. And it was exciting for me to use that language to show narratives about people who looked like me, who were also mixed up with Orientalist tropes about body types and about body hair and about hygiene and cleanliness, but occupying spaces that have agency, living bourgeois lives in Western capitals.
So what really strikes me about, well, one of the many things that strike me about your work is the mystery behind what is going on in the pictures, the compositions. There's always something happening and you're never quite sure what is happening, how it's happening, what is the relationship between the characters, the people in your paintings. And what struck me from the beginning is how true that is of Vermeer as well. And this tension between people in a painting and narratives in a painting, which are not straightforward and direct and linear.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how, because, Museum Boys in the company of two Vermeer conversation pieces, let's say, are sort of interacting with each other in a very interesting way.
I think most painters probably go through like a Vermeer phase. I went through mine shortly after high school.
And historians too. Everyone goes through
Yeah. He's the brightest star of that generation of painters who were doing that prosperous-ish household paintings. What attracted me, probably at the time without my knowing it even, was that those pictures are functioning in a moralistic society, and these are naughty pictures. They're about men feeding women alcohol in the middle of the day, making them blush and giggle. There are stories about anticipation and arrival and the presence of a potential lover, even when they're not there. It's a very mysterious, quiet encounter between two people. There's always a power shift. It's oblique. It kind of reminds me of the way queer and trans people maybe function in social systems in which they're endangered. They're coded. It's coded behavior. But I mean, really, the people at the time who must have been looking at Vermeer's paintings knew that they were naughty paintings. I think, but it was just an excuse to have a moralistic reason to paint them. It's like, oh, don't do this, just frame it and put it on your wall. So I wanted to kind of recreate that exchange between two figures, but not in a literal way. Initially, I thought maybe, I love domesticity, making pictures about domesticity, and why not just do that? But then, I was going to show with Vermeer, so that wasn't enough. So I went into a magical realm, an allegorical space, in this made-up art historical museum space with imaginary sculptures, a sculpture that is lying in between the two main figures, which is something that I think of as a fag buttle. And fag buttles are a series of paintings that I've been working on and have done in the past. They're sort of heaps of laundry, bottles of things, body parts, not in a kind of psychopath way, but just in a rubbery, sweet way. uh,
In a
but
vitrine, in a museum,
yes, yes.
in this case.
Right. So I just think of them as these exhausted heaps of greed, but in this case, thinking of the idea of the Dutch Empire and trade, at the same time thinking about art as a conduit to people understanding each other, or as smoke and mirrors. And I wanted to arrange these objects carefully, or at least make sure that they look like they were curated in the way that objects in Vermeer's paintings are curated. Because within the quotidian scene in most of Vermeer's domestic paintings, there is a larger context that we can see in like maps. These are sort of the first solidly middle-class people, in a sense, in my imagination, really. Vermeer's paintings kind of start a promise of the kind of life that millions of people think that Americans lead now and want, you know?
The museum in your painting is filled with objects from all over the world. You have objects to do with sort of Muslim religion, with Buddhist, Hindu, with Western sort of civilization, number of different things. And of course, part of this project is also about the fact that all of the artists represented in Living Histories are not originally from New York, and all of the curators working on the show are not originally from New York. So all of us chose New York to live in, or maybe New York chose us, I'm not sure. What was your journey to New York? How did you get to New York?
I was born in Lahore. I grew up in a very conservative social system and family, a middle-class family. I went to an all-boys prep school. I was a pretty femme, queer kid, so I was bullied a lot, and there was a great threat of violence always in the air. You know, I couldn't even conceive of a future of the kind of freedom that I have now. I was able to kind of respect myself really through art, through being able to draw and paint well. So from high school, I went to the States. I'd never been to the States. I got financial aid, so there was no question of going anywhere else. So I went straight to Ohio.
That must have been a big jump.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was such a shock that, like, I don't even remember the first year, really. I was just probably walking around like a zombie. Just no context at all of, like, cornfields and conservatism. And then at college, I was studying art history. I was studying painting. Painting was something that I was teaching myself in the Western tradition because I'd never had an art history class before. And so I was really, it was like I was a total sponge. I was taking it in. Once I graduated from there, there was this fantasy about an artist's life in New York. I had a few friends here. We lived together, we painted together. There were very few figurative painters. Figurative painting was not allowed at all. I wanted to carry on doing what I was doing, which was figurative painting, and I didn't care that it wasn't kind of the lingua franca of the art world at all. I understood that for me, that would be a subsistence kind of living, but painting gave me a lot of meaning, and I was very happy to be freer in New York. It's another reason I wanted to be here was to be out. Initially, when I was painting, the paintings were a lot like Vermeer's paintings. They were pretty oblique. You know, it was through painting that I wanted to be out, and this was the place to do that for me, to feel safe, and to also feel empowered.
So Museum Boys is with two Vermeers. What was in your head when you were trying to create this work?
Honestly, I had to convince myself to forget that that was the case because it was paralyzing me. Nothing I can do is going to be, you know, in my imagination was going to be worthy of that. So I had to play a little cool in the studio and be like, whatever. Like,
It's
whatever.
a good approach.
Whatever I have to say is good enough.
Well, it is. So.
So I mean, but like, you know, it was beyond belief for me, and like I could never, like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I could never imagine this. This is the most exciting thing.
So you're surrounded by all these great masterpieces from the past. If you could go back in time and paint one work at the Frick, what would that be?
I would do The Forge by Koelle. What I love about it is the violence of the picture and the grime and the sweat of it. It's a kind of picture of traditional kind of masculinity. The painting itself doesn't have a narrative, but the act is just so evocative of intolerant systems that bend human nature into kind of punitive laws, ideas of young men's bodies and nationalism, race. But then you can also trust Goya to put a very sweet face in the middle of it. Oh, this, dark, noisy, hellish kind of place, the transformation of sweat and grime into something like dark and velvety and just so delicious.
And that unbelievable red, just this,
Yes.
the core of the painting where you
Yes,
get
in the center of it.
the metal at
Yeah.
the very
Yeah.
middle,
Yeah.
surrounded by sort of
Yeah.
grays and blacks
Yeah.
and more sort of muted tones.
Yeah.
It just draws your attention into the heart of the whole operation, effectively. I always loved that tension, and for us, I think it reaches an even more interesting level, thinking about Frick as someone who made his fortune through metalwork in
Right.
Pittsburgh, buying this picture, which is so different from other things at the Frick, and living with it, living with this image of metalworkers all of his life in his grand gallery at the house and now here at Frick Madison.
It's just an incredible, dark painting, which is classic Goya, frightening and sexy at the same time.
So Museum Boys is going to be here at Frick Madison until later in January 2022. What happens beyond that? What's next for you? What are you working on?
Well, I'm very excited. I've been very busy making 2 shows for next year. There is a solo show at the Baltimore Museum of Art in May 2022. And then there is another solo show at the M. Woods Museum in Beijing in August 22. I'm just so incredibly excited about these 2 shows, and I've been spending the year just making new work.
Great, cannot wait to see them. Thank you so much for contributing to this project in such a meaningful way. It was great to talk today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.